It is round number 3 of the summer mailbag. Who's the number 2 option and alternate universe for the Bucks with no wave and stretch? We take a look at those scenarios and answer your questions coming up next on today's Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis and Frank Madden. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day, each and every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Football season's around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Got quite a few questions to get through yet. Camille, you and I did a show. You and Frank did one before that. A ton of questions we had submitted by all of you guys, and continue to submit those because we're always going to need mailbag shows throughout the course of the season, and really 1 month left in the offseason as well. One housekeeping item, as you noticed, there was no show on Monday. I think, Camille, the plan is we're going to do a Tuesday through Thursday schedule this week and next. If something that warrants a show for a Monday or Friday happens, then we will certainly do that. We pledged to do 5 days a week as long as we could. We just need the time. It's been a long off season. Right, we're all busy. Frank's got 2 kids traveling for work. Camille, you're starting to hear everywhere on the radio airwaves, and Packers season starting. She's on the NBA show and her own podcast. I got a ton of other stuff as well. So we're going to take these 2 days for the next 2 weeks. So we're thinking Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week and next, and then probably Tuesday through Friday, the week after that, with it being Labor Day, and then we're back in the swing of things. But a lot of mailbag questions that have gone unanswered, and a couple interesting ones. There's a ton of Chris Livingston related questions. I promise we didn't just cherry pick those, but we'll start with, I think, one of the more interesting ones here. And this comes to us from Oscar, kind of like an alternate universe version of the Bucks. Would it have been better if the team hadn't waived and stretched Dame and instead accepted that things weren't looking great this season? Do you think staying the course was the right move, or should they have done something different? Second part of the question, what's the plan for this offseason? What does it look like to you for the most optimal outcome for this group? And went into some worst case scenarios, what our predictions are there, and how to get another championship run out of this group. And if we should just view the second round as a massive success. But let's start with the first part of it. Should you just accept it? Hey, this isn't going to work out, and let's just play the cards that were dealt here and go into a walk year with Damian Lillard next year? Or was waiving and stretching him the right move? I know Camille and we've talked about this quite a bit, but Frank, we'll start with you. Is there any scenario where you would say, man, just keep going forward with Giannis and Dame?
I mean, you guys have, I think, Justin, you've alluded to it in a couple of the episodes that haven't been on this summer, just the idea that if Dame doesn't get hurt, right, what is the likelihood that he's actually back this fall? Or, do they look to move on from him this summer? And obviously in a hopefully a much more productive way than just waiving and stretching him. So I don't believe Dame would have walked from 60 million or whatever he would have been owed. That whole thing that got thrown out when he was waived and stretched. He's like, oh, well, Dame thought about maybe he just opts out.
Well, he was ecstatic and he was looking forward to the opportunities.
Yeah. I think it's one thing to get waived and stretched and get all your money and then be able to get more money going where you want. I mean, that kind of worked out perfectly in the sense of just controlling his fate this summer. But yeah, I don't think he would have actually opted out next summer. I mean, you could have kind of just kept running it back, obviously. And then certainly there's scenarios where you could open up real cap space the year after that. But I mean, to me, the most important thing is, and you reference me having children, it's gotten me, at times I've thought sort of philosophically, there's been a fair bit written about, how the most precious, especially when you have kids, right? You start thinking about the amount of time you have left with them, especially, given that they're probably going to, at 18, be done with you for a while. You're not going to see them very much. But this idea of like the time you have, right, and that being sort of the most precious resource that you have. And I think if you're the Bucks, that thought can be applied to Giannis's prime. And so, just thinking about the next 2 years, if you're basically saying this year is pretty much a wash, right? I mean, essentially a version of the Bucks that is probably pretty close to what they have, but no Myles Turner, right? Would basically be kind of probably what we'd be thinking of it as. And then like you then hope Dame is some version of a pretty good NBA player still in that walk year. Again, I think probably the more likely thing would be that you use that salary and you try to find some way to trade him someplace where he can still be additive, and maybe there's less, maybe they don't have a big concern about his contract value at that point. And so again, like that's kind of very difficult, I think, to sort of parse it. So yeah, I mean, I think we can certainly debate. Oops, my FaceTime is randomly going on while I'm doing a podcast. There's a problem with using a Mac. I think we can certainly debate alternate scenarios of the world, whether there is a path for the Bucks to meaningfully do anything these next couple of years. Very fair sort of counterpoint to the argument that a Dame version of the world is not going to get you anywhere. But I think probably the guiding principle for the Bucks was, how do we surround Giannis with as many players as possible that can help him win however many games we can win, even if that's not meaningfully contending. I think that's obviously the path they opted for. And yeah, I mean, it's probably, I would say, marginally better the next 2 years than the alternative. But certainly beyond that, right? Beyond the next couple years, the 3 years beyond that, where you're going to have Dame's stretch number on the books. Yeah, I'd say pretty clearly, like at that point, that's the downside is just the, that's $22 million slug of cash that that's actively limiting what you can do from a flexibility standpoint.
Nothing to sneeze at. 22.5 million. Like we've talked about the cap going up and that offering some relief in the coming years, but it's still 22.
It's the mid-level basically that
you know what I mean?
Without that you're not able to offer. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's to keep that window open in these 2 years here. So like, I mean, again, we've talked about how it makes sense for the Bucks to go this route. And I mean, not having Myles Turner feels like a big hole to have on this roster had they continued to the route, with Dame on it, not playing this upcoming year.
Yeah, I'll say that, like, we've obviously talked about this a ton this offseason. But marginally better this season, yes. And there's certainly scenarios where we've talked about if guys have huge step forward type seasons where you can say, hey, everything broke the Bucks way. And in those scenarios, you could talk me into the Bucks had everything go their way. Giannis was MVP worthy and they got the 3 seed. Year 2 is the more interesting one to me, where, does it put the Bucks at the level they were 3 years ago? Who knows? But I think there's an opportunity to be far better than marginally better, depending on what happens with a big contract they have that's going to be expiring and the inclusion of draft picks that are going to open up. Like we kind of talked about it last week, and gap year is the wrong way to word it. But in a sense, you could look at it like this is our remain competitive year and see how this gels. But next summer is where we feel like, okay, if this does work out, and you still got a lot of work next summer with the 1+1s that were signed to get guys back. But that's where the opportunity is to say, we can really add a significant piece to the roster with that expiring deal and anything else we can include, and then multiple first round picks to add to Myles Turner and Giannis.
Yeah, and I think that was before the Dame situation happened with him being waived and stretched. When we were tossing out things for the Bucks and what it might look like, one thing I said, well, maybe it's this year is like the gap year, the retooling year, whatever you want to call it. And next off season is when you really try to push all your chips in. But seeing the state of the Eastern Conference, again, I can understand why the Bucks looked at this and was like, listen, we know the likelihood of us being seen as a favorite is not going to be high with us making this move, but it is an open conference. You have injuries affecting Boston, you have injuries affecting Indiana. Why can't we be a team that makes some noise, especially when we have the best player in the conference? What do we need to put around him in order to make this happen? So like ultimately the Bucks going in this route, it makes sense to me. I'm on board with it. Like if it was a do-over, I'd push this button again, even without us knowing at this point how it all plays out with the Myles Turner fit next to Giannis.
And there's a part 2 to this that you brought up, Frank, that I want to get your thoughts on, and yours, Camille. We'll jump into that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, it's August 26th that officially becomes FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, 1 week from today, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. So take a flyer on Jordan Love in the MVP race, or crown your champion Green Bay Packers in August, or just parlay your division winner and dark horses. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only, 1 week from today, August 26th. FanDuel, play your game. So the other part to this, I understand it's a big anchor with the dead cap space, but the further removed we are from it, I don't think there's a scenario where not doing this wasn't the way forward for this team, because it's 1 year where you're not going to have Damian Lillard. And look, maybe he comes back later this year in different scenarios. It's still a pretty big if. And then the second part to that is, I mean, we still need to see what he's going to be like coming back from a rather significant injury for an undersized player that's going to rely on burst and needs something like his Achilles to still have that gravity. But, even if you get to a point where you mentioned, Frank, if he could play to that type of level where there's some interest that he could be a supplemental piece. I mean, I'm never going to say a contract is untradeable, because we always see it happen. But where's the team? And at that point, are you looking at, you're basically breaking up his contract for like one playable guy, salary filler, and that's basically it. And are you getting in a better spot if that's the case?
It's hard to say that you could do that. I mean, I remember Frank throwing out earlier in the offseason, like, are we just setting ourselves up here for a Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard trade at this point of like, we're just going to swap these salaries here because it's not working out for either side. What does that look like? Like, that's where the conversation was at one point. I mean, kind of joking, but like, what else were you going to be able to do with that contract with him coming off the Achilles at that time? So I already mentioned it. I would do it again at this point without even knowing the outcome, just because it did free up some things for the Bucks financially and also allowed them to add a Myles Turner, which was a position for the Bucks with Brook Lopez leaving, where it was kind of like, well, what are we going to do at center long-term for this team going forward? So it makes sense to me. So ultimately, Frank, no Bradley Beal for Dame trade. Instead, we get the dead cap hit here.
I was going to say, I wanted to make sure that was like a thing I half jokingly suggested after Dame tore his Achilles, not before he tore his Achilles.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, like, it is ironic, right, that when the Bucks waive and stretch Dame, it's like this cataclysmic, oh my God, they just waived and stretched 112 million or whatever it was. And then, by multiples bigger than any prior wave and stretch. And then, 2 weeks later, the Suns do basically the exact same number with Beal. So it just kind of shows you how just the economics and dynamics of the league are fundamentally changing. And I mean, obviously part of it too is like it's kind of hard to compare, the current salary cap world we live in to, when Josh Smith was waived and stretched by the Pistons, however many years ago that was. I mean, the cap is probably 2x whatever it was. I don't even remember what year that was, but we are in a fundamentally different world. And Camille, you hit on the other point that I didn't, which was, it's not just Giannis's prime, right? And just trying to like figure out like how do you get as much as you can from the best years of Giannis's career, but it is this unique season in which the East is vulnerable, or there's more opportunity with Boston and Indiana in particular, kind of KO'd from certainly what everyone would expect would be meaningful contention. Not to say that there isn't some scenario where the Bucks finish below one or both those teams. Like I guess there's some scenario there. Although I think Justin, you were talking about the Celtics not long ago on this podcast. Like when you look at that roster, it's like it makes you wonder, I don't think they were really trying to fill out that roster when I
think they're quiet quitting.
I was gonna say like it feels like they are just basically waiting for Jaylen Brown to like pull a hamstring and then
rolled his ankle. He's going to be out 3 weeks.
Yeah, and then shelve him for 2 months or something, and just sort of see how they can maximize their draft pick or something, because it's just scary. And actually, it is sort of interesting too, because it's like we're looking at this as a 1-year window, but it's like look, Boston with Tatum and Brown, that's a great starting point, but they have to reconstruct that roster like next summer.
And then you're going to face questions over, do we have to move Derek White's contract?
Right.
And so,
and Indiana
season 2.
Yeah. And I mean, Indiana has less work to do, I think, a year from now when Halliburton's coming back, just because they have greater depth and, the dynamic is a little bit different. But by the same token, I mean, like if you're the Bucks and you're trying to be competitive, to get the double whammy of like you add a talent and you take away a talent from one of your biggest rivals, that's also a pretty good move, right? That's from a kind of competitive dynamic. That's also something that hopefully it works out for the Bucks, right? Hopefully Myles Turner is as good or better than he was with the Pacers these last couple of years. So yeah, we'll see. But I mean, as a fan, like I've certainly made peace with it. I think there'll be a more interesting product this year. You don't have just sort of the weight of the Dame situation hanging over you anymore. And yeah, I mean, you wish it worked out, but that NBA Cup banner will fly forever, folks. And the Giannis extension, again, as we've jokingly said it, like, hey, if Adrian Griffin and Damian Lillard helped get that extension done with Giannis, then there's some serious silver lining there.
And it still looks magnificent. I was in the building a week ago and just couldn't take my eyes off of that 2024 NBA Cup championship banner.
I thought you were going to say the extension banner that hangs. 2023 Giannis 5-year max.
I mean, we should just create banners that are all the moves that John Horst made leading into a Giannis decision.
They should be hanging up in the practice facility, just leading up to Horst door.
And look, Boston, it's going to be interesting to monitor that. Like we mentioned, you got those two pieces, but Derek White's already 31 this season, and then he's under contract through 28 and has a player option for 28, 29. Cleveland is a very interesting team. If it doesn't work out this year, they're very expensive with Donovan Mitchell and Mobley and Garland. And I mean, even DeAndre Hunter and what he's earning, and Jared Allen, that this is the last year that group is together. So to your point, Frank, I mean, I don't anticipate the Eastern Conference to just suck for the next 5 years, but who knows how long this window is open. And, I'm not a card player, but I would assume it's kind of like the way you view it this year. If you're the Bucks, is like, well, let's just see if we can bluff our way to winning a pot here. Like we have Giannis and we feel like we added some decent pieces around him that at the very least we feel like we're as good as we were a year ago, hopefully better.
With this being the first step in playing in a quote unquote new way with the point Giannis as well, which is the other piece of if Damian Lillard was still here. The piece I kept saying was like, well, at least if he does remain on the team, he comes back, you can ease him back into more of an off-ball role initially while he reacclimates himself coming off of injury. But that's no longer a concern for the Bucks. And now it's more so of they have this sample size from this past season, from the past playoffs, of we think this works around Giannis initiating the offense more often. They're going to kind of double down on this season. And then it feels like they're going to kind of tweak and see if like, is this the way to go forward for this team? And Horst made it very clear, at least to me, in the interview he did with Eric Name on The Athletic, of like, we know Trader John, like the trades will continue to happen if he sees like this is not working or this needs to be tweaked with. Like he's going to try to find a way to continue to bring in different talent if things aren't working the way that's intended to. So like, even though this year's a gap year, and even though I think the Bucks, if things go really well, can be a team that has home court advantage come playoff time, like this is still kind of like a step in a new direction. So it's kind of like, okay, let's see if we can get the right pieces in order to play in this new style, and also see if the Bucks do try to lean on depth a little bit more than they have in years past.
Got one more interesting one to get. We got a handful, but this one especially stood out to me. Non-cap related. We still have some of those to get to, and it's another scenario type of question. So we'll get into that coming up after this. So kind of on the heels of what we just discussed there, we get this question from, what is it, Meb? It's All-Star break. The Bucks are 8th in the non-injury division. So what went wrong? And did they underachieve? What should we be on alert for if that's the case? I'll just say, if they're 8th in the Eastern Conference at the All-Star break, yes, I would say they're underachieving.
Yeah, I would too. I think that, yeah, underachieving at that point. And I think if they are 8th at that point, and injuries are not a reason as to why they're sitting there, I think one thing that
opening up a pretty big can of worms if that's the case.
I know, right? And I think one of those worms would be the fact that they're not knocking down threes at an efficiency level that they were last season, or it's just a lot worse. Like it feels like the shot making for the Bucks will have to take a step back, and also like the defense side of things. Like we've talked about, like could it be a top 5 defense for the Bucks? Kind of need to be if we think they're going to be a top 2, top 3 seed in the East. What's the flip side of that? What if it's a team where the rebounding takes a step back? The point of attack defense isn't as strong as we thought that it would be going into the season. It's the size, whatever it might be. I think it would come down to the threes aren't falling for them at a level, efficiency level that we saw last year, or even just like a top 10 level in the league, and probably the volume going up alongside that. And then the defense just not putting it together and not being able to end possessions and giving up second chance opportunities too consistently. That would be what I would think is why things would be 8 seeded if it's not injury related at that point.
I mean, they had the high scoring duo in the NBA last year. They led the league in 3-point percentage, and they had the 11th best offense. So I don't know that like that much has to go wrong actually in this scenario to be 8th. Because I think if we just look at, I was just looking again at the standings, right? Cleveland, New York, Orlando probably, right, are the ones that kind of like the top 3 that I'd say most people assume are going to be ahead of the Bucks. Yeah. And then I think Atlanta and Detroit are like the next 2 that are probably like a lot of people are penciling in. Mm-hmm. So that gets you to 5 teams, right? So they're your 6th. And then I think, you look at the rest of the East. Again, is there, a scenario where the Miami Heat, who I think have gotten,
I think they'll be better,
more talented, and they, they're not going to have the Jimmy Butler BS kind of hanging over them this year, right? Which I think obviously should, in theory, help. But, the Heat, and then pick one other team. I don't know. It's kind of hard to pick maybe one other team that could be ahead of the Bucks. I mean, like I keep looking at the 76ers and I'm just like, what on earth is this team going to be? Like, is there
now or never? Yeah.
Like maybe Joel Embiid's 30 games that he plays this year all come before the All-Star break. And so he doesn't, fall apart until
Well, where are their
until
back-to-backs?
February or
Because
something.
they have the most in the league, and if those are all early, then there's a lot of non-Embiid games before the All-Star break.
So I don't know. I mean, I think bottom line, like I think the Bucks could be an okay version of themselves and potentially be the 8th seed at the All-Star break.
Yeah. Even Indiana too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a version with Indiana where maybe just they completely click playing their style that they have been even without Halliburton, which I don't think is easy, but between Nembhard and Bucks killer TJ McConnell, excuse me, wouldn't altogether shock me. So I certainly don't. I will agree in the sense that I would be disappointed if the Bucks are in the 8th seed come All-Star break time, but would not be shocking. And I don't think it needs to be like some horrific scenario. And again, I think probably there's a scenario where you're 8th and you still have daylight to get to 6th or 5th,
That, and I should add that clarification. Like if they're 8th, but it's what I assume the Eastern Conference is going to be, where it's like, hey, the Bucks are 8th, but they're only 2 games out of the 4 seed or 2 games out, like something like that. Then it's a much different conversation than what I don't know if he was alluding to. Like, wow, the Bucks are 8th because they're below 500 and they're 4 games back of 7th right now. Yeah. So there are a lot. I mean, we just peeled off a ton of those teams. Indiana still has the skeleton there. I mean, one of these years, Frank, right? The Raptors have to figure it out with those young pieces. Same with Charlotte. So there's just going to be I think, a clear shelf here where the Cavs, the Knicks, and probably the Magic are all right up there in front of everyone. And then you're just going to have this lump of teams that were a 10-game sample size. You look at it and you think, like, is this team actually the 3rd best team? And then 10 games will pass. You're like, wow, that team's really a 7 seed or something like that for the rest of the East.
By the way, you mentioned the, Cavaliers being a second apron team and kind of the shelf life of these teams, right? Boston obviously being on the other side of that shelf life.
Orlando.
I mean, Orlando. Yeah, Orlando is in such an interesting spot because it feels like they're just arriving and
they're jumping the gun.
Yeah. It's going to be like as soon as they kind of get into the party, they're going to be, like taking a look over their shoulder with all those, kind of tax and apron considerations kind of coming for them as well. But, I don't know. I mean, it might as well, I take your hat off. Like they went for it. But it is a weird situation to have a roster as young as it is. Because even like Bane, right? Like even the like quote unquote veteran guy that they added on a big contract, Bane is also really young. So I mean, hopefully for their sake, like obviously they're going to hope that it clicks, and then they may just have some kind of difficult decisions to make, trimming some of like, basically we're gonna have to get rid of all the like, all those Jonathan Isaac, Wendell Carter contracts, like all that stuff's going to have to be cut because they just have to go like basically make oxygen choices and trim down to kind of the bare bones outside of the kind of big guys they have. But again, like we've seen, going that route, like that hasn't really been the path to winning, right? Just being super top heavy. So we'll be interested to see if that trend continues here over, the next few years.
They got 4 guys at the mid 30s or higher salary starting next season in Wagner, Bane, Suggs, and Banchero. That they're already a second apron team next year. They're just under it right now for the 26-27 season, but that's just with 12 guys under contract. So like they're already jumping into those waters there. There's still a ton that we have to get to, and one somewhat interesting one, somewhat cap related, somewhat more hypothetical, that really jumped out to me in terms of the questions that we got. So we're going to spin this off into a second part, and we'll dig into those types of questions, like what could the Bucks be facing here with all these 1+1s? What's that going to mean for next season, especially if guys start to break out here, and keeping Giannis happy, the subject of a lot of these questions. So we'll get into those coming up on part 4 of this mailbag a little bit later in this week. For Frank and Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.